Being stuck in the middle in your dynasty leagues, this is the time of year midway through the dynasty regular season where that comes into play the most, assessing your team and picking a direction and those applicable moves. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, I think 3 and 4 is really the line. 2 and 5, you got to have some extenuating circumstances here. But if you're above 500, you're pushing forward. But really 3 and 4, maybe some 2 and 5 scenarios are where you say, where am I going this year?
Yeah, and it can be a really tough question. And that's why I'm in a spot specifically that I have this problem. And so this was front of mind when we were talking about, hey, let's pick a topic for this week. This was front of mind for me because of this specific team. And I'll give you the example. I'm 3 and 4. I've won 42% of my all play records, which would be if I played every team every week.
You are what your record. So basically, you are a true 3 and 4.
100%, right at 3 and 4. I'm getting Dak back. I got Cordero Patterson on IR, and I've lost Breece Hall. And so I'm sort of sitting there with a couple of things in mind, right? I've got an okay team, probably an above average team if I sort of racked it up. I'm probably not that hurt, right? In all honesty, losing Hall hurts, but I'm probably not that hurt. If I make a couple of moves in this next couple of weeks, I can, I'm not saying tank my potential points, but my potential points can go way down, and I can, sell a guy like Higbee, could really help somebody else, get me some picks back, and keep my points down, which is what determines the draft order, right? So I have a couple of different things, or like I have a couple of extra picks that I could add to this team and potentially go out. So I'm sort of in the middle, and I'm wondering sort of what you think in terms of how you address this, sort of what your calculus is and sort of what moves you make going forward.
Yeah, you outlined certainly some of the key points, which is looking at all play, looking at how you actually scored, maybe potential points for the strength of your roster. And yeah, I did the same thing. I knew some of my 2 and 4 teams. This was the critical week because 3 and 4, I looked at some probabilities for a cross section of leagues from last year, and the odds are way different at 3 and 4 to make the playoffs versus 2 and 5. And I think 3 and 4 is the one that you really have to decide. But I will say this. In my older age now, I have become a lot more slow to anoint myself like we're going forward, we're going backwards, we're going next year. That I think at 3 and 4, I would probably slow play it a little bit in terms of, okay, I'm going to give it 1 to 2 more weeks. If I go 2 and 0, if I go 0 and 2, I kind of have my answer. 1 and 1, just keep reassessing. Like one thing is I used to think you have to get out in front of the market, and there's only like one deal that a contender is going to make with a team that's out of the playoff picture for a certain player, for their playoff push. And then they're going to say no to everything else. If you wait too long and you're like, oh, well, I'm selling at Thanksgiving. I would rather determine my fate independent of trying to time the market of being a seller per se. So I'm big on the, like, if you don't know, that's fine. Give it another week or two, because we've had situations where you're 2 games out with 3 games to go. Imagine if you had tossed it in a month ago, like you're still right there. And to say no to the season right in front of you, I mean, you're 8 months out from contending again if you do that. So I don't like now the idea of just throwing it away. It's tough at 1 and 6 to really validate it in any form or fashion. But I would also say it doesn't mean you're making a bunch of moves, right? I mean, I think we actually have one in front of our face that is pretty interesting, because if you have Breece Hall and you want to sell for someone still in the top 5 or 6 or 7 of the dynasty running backs, I've seen a lot of almost straight across stuff between Breece Hall and Josh Jacobs or Travis Etienne or Christian McCaffrey. I mean, a bunch of guys that are probably all relatively similarly valued, and both teams can technically win. you're getting somebody back that can be a strong producer this year. They're getting someone for next year. They're getting someone younger. And so I think there are some natural. Javonte Williams is probably, if he hasn't been moved yet in a particular league, he is still an option. So I think you have some data points on guys that you can shift away to next year. You're making dynasty trades, but I would say you really got to get some good equity if they're a big asset like Breece Hall, and that's what he's returning. But just, I think you have to be careful about making, especially going towards at 3 and 4. Let's make some contender moves. If you're selling a second, if you're selling a third, but like making big boy stuff, I think you got to be really careful about the profile you're getting. And then I also think you have to be careful to still hedge a little bit and assume that first is going to be non-playoff if you're trading it, just so you insulate yourself if that plan to go from 3 and 4 to 7 and 5 and keep trucking along doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think, like, as you sit here, like, I have a couple of teams where I'm totally stuck in the middle, but I see, like, I think in our reality this year and the new reality of this season is every time I can quote the new reality, I got to do it. But when you look at our teams this year, there's guys that we have a lot of on our teams that are sort of coming back right now, right? Hopkins might be a guy that we have coming back. We might have Dak Prescott, right? Yeah, Deshaun Watson is still out there looming, right? If you can sort of get to that point, there's a member of your cavalry coming back to help you. You have guys that are sort of re-entering and re-emerging, DeAndre Swift, for example. Like, you have guys sort of in your atmosphere.
Also just teams and depth charts, like Ezekiel Elliott with Dak looks a lot better, right? I mean, you would project that the rest of the season looks better than the 4, 5, 6 games that Dak missed. And you might have underperformers. The Tampa Bay offense, you might think, at any point they could turn it around. The Rams could be another one with Matthew Stafford. So you have to kind of assess that. Or you missed Jonathan Taylor the past couple of weeks, and he also had a couple of lesser games by his standards. So you have to kind of put all that together. But I think the value of time is the other part of not rushing into week 7 means got to go. I mean, we still have a month before many and most dynasty trade deadlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it doesn't necessarily rule you out. I tend to think you keep an open mind, sort of as you said, keep sort of playing it out. I think 3 and 4 is the time you kind of play it out, but
you can still poke around some trades. I mean, that's not to say you can't send some offers. And frankly, if you're 3 and 4 and a team that's at 3 and 4 or 2 and 5 is thinking of folding the tents up, that might take one team that could be your competition for a playoff spot out of the mix because they're willing to pull the trigger and shift things towards 2023. I would also say, and just looking at this every week, there's a bunch of high leverage NFL backfields that have missed 0 games. Mm-hmm. And most depth charts are going to be missing games. So if they haven't yet, deductive reasoning the next couple months. So if you get that perfect storm of what if it happens this coming week? I mean, Breece Hall just happened. Now, a lot of people sitting there with Michael Carter, it looks like that's not really going to be the answer, at least initially or right now, because they brought in James Robinson. But that was a potential answer and a potential massive shift. A team in your league losing Breece Hall, you or someone else gaining Michael Carter. And if he were the lead back, that's a big difference over the rest of the season potentially. So I would just harken back to saying, we've got situations like Browns, Buccaneers, Packers, Vikings, Bengals, Cowboys, Steelers, with how they like Jaylen Warren. I mean, these are all situations. Texans with Rex Burkhead, just to throw some love his direction. These are all really good depth charts. When you say starter instantly out, what happens? Well, there's A, carnage. B, there is whoever has that backup, instant starter, instant potential impact player for a month, 3 games, the right 3 games, rest of the season. So I think you have to be really careful because if you have 2 or 3 names on those depth charts I just mentioned, you have the potential to be almost an unstoppable, can't lose type team in a best case scenario for a stretch run. And if you said no at 2 and 5, because again, you win the next 2 weeks, you're 4 and 5, you're there. You've got a chip in a chair and a chance. So, and again, what if you hit on some of these running backs and you already folded in the tent? Like, come on. Like, now what are you doing? Right. You're trying to sell them? You can't use them? So that would be disappointing. You get to a point where, well, we've seen this before, where you're like, oh, I'm out of it. And you're like 1-5, 0-6. And then you make a trade, and then now it's like you can't lose. Right? I mean, you start winning.
Right.
It's amazing how that goes. So again, contend until you're not. And I still say at 2-5, a lot of teams should still have their head poking in there, poking out the dogging door, saying, I'm here. Where's the treat? I'm looking for it. I'm playing this week. I'm playing to win.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think keep playing it out, right? Unless you really don't have, you don't have those outs. But I think I think a lot of the players that we have, because they're underperforming and you just would bet higher than that,
outs,
or you look, you just look at some expected points models and you see, heck, all right, like Stafford's way underproducing, right? Expected points, right? And it's all touchdowns. Like, okay, like that's, you can expect a little bounce back, right? And it's all touchdowns and he's getting crushed on interceptions. Like that's making up a ton of the points that he's missing this year. Like there's easy stuff there that I think you're looking for.
And again, like for example, Brady's having by far his lowest touchdown rate. And you also, you have a situation where, I mean, what if your plan at tight end was Kyle Pitts? Like, so you probably started him a bunch. Maybe now you're not starting him. And where do you go from here? But what if he wakes up? What if some of these players, and keep in mind, you got some of these flash players that are first year, second year, they can end up, progressing to the second half of the season, and all of a sudden you really got something.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. Running backs, like you said, underperforming quarterback profiles, and some of these pass catchers, you put 2 or 3 players together, and all of a sudden it's a difference that now you're winning games that you lost before. And it could be a puck luck too. I mean, I didn't even talk because normally I don't do this until December-ish or 2-3 games to go. But who's on your schedule? You might have played a much, points against. Look at that. I mean, are you one of the top 2 or 3 in the league? Have you played a couple teams that are 7-0, 6-1, 5-2? You're like, well, I'm not playing them again. Right. So, I mean, I got them out of the way. You might have some tanking or non-contending teams on your schedule that they don't have. So
yeah,
all in perspective.
Yeah, I like that.
But I think almost Aaron Rodgers relax. Frankie says relax. I think is one of the phrase that pays when you're stuck in the middle, because like you mentioned, I mean, Dak Prescott back is a major moving piece, and frankly, you could have had a situation where you just had early buy troubles. Like this last week. What if you had? What was it? I mean, like for example, the week. Well, like like if you have a league with Josh Allen and Dak Prescott, well, the week before you didn't have Dak, you had Josh Allen. This week you had Dak getting back into it for his first game. No Josh Allen. You could have lost both of those.
Right.
And now you get both of them potentially every week. So you could be cooking with gas, as we like to say.
Yeah.
Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 125 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I want to remind you to look like a champion with that Football Guys official gear and merch. You got that classic Black Eyed Joe logo, quality designs, materials, hats, shirts, outerwear, coffee mugs, and more. That's over at shop.footballguys.com. And Jordan already shouted it out a little bit, but we got a ton of Dynasty content over at Football Guys. You want to check out all the premium content, projections. Gene Bramall does a great job with the injuries you want to know. He puts stuff out on Monday, which is awesome in terms of projections for the current week. Jordan does Dynasty waivers of the future. I do new reality as well as some Dynasty trading content as we go through, and we highlight some of that content here on the show as we go. And you can find that, again, give us some love in addition to rating us, but sign up at footballguys.com/dynasty winners.
It's time for the Stash of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
For the Sleeper Stash of the Week. And Jordan, we've got a really good theme for this week that's going to apply, one that you've used and monikered before. And the player we're going to use as an example this week is D'Ernest Johnson. So we always like to talk about probabilities and increasing it, dialing it up by, even if it's 1%, 2%, 3%, we talk about maybe churning out a backup running back on a bye week. That's one sneaky example because starter's not getting hurt. He's not playing this coming week. But talk about D'Ernest Johnson, talking about the process that applies here when referencing the NFL and the weekly schedule.
Yeah. So one of the things that I look at is I always look at what the Thursday game is, right? I think the Thursday game, so this week, what I would look for is right who's playing the Thursday game next week. So I want to know, right? We're going into week 8. Who's playing the week 9 Thursday game? Theory being, if you have a player playing in that game that plays on Sunday, they get hurt, they get banged up, sprained ankle, what have you, right? Hamstring, whatever, concussion, whatever injury that they suffer, real quick turnaround, hard turnaround to make. And so the theory is, make sure you're optimized sort of in that backup. And even if that means, you're going into Sunday, this week, for example, like if you have a running back, there's not a great example of the backup this week, but if you have a running back or something like that that's injured going into this week's game, you go down to the third guy and just sort of stash him and see what happens. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You get an early chance to cut him and then just move on. It's not a great example of that this week. Gardner Minshew would be like the one example of that going into next week. But I think the other intervening event is the trade deadline's occurring, right? So the trade deadline is next week. It's November 1st. And the big name that I think keeps popping up, Kareem Hunt. So I think, instead of treating next week's Thursday game as an opportunity, you treat next week's trade deadline as the opportunity to sort of get ahead on a potential thing. Listen, is Kareem Hunt going to get traded? I'm skeptical of that. But if he does, it could be a big windfall because all of a sudden you're an injury away guy behind Nick Chubb. And we've seen what Dearness Johnson can do. Guy can play, right? So that would sort of be my angle on this. And I think last year, actually, Dearness Johnson, I call this the Dearness Johnson rule because Dearness Johnson on a short week last year had a big game on Thursday night. Kareem Hunt was banged up going into the game before. Nick Chubb got hurt on Sunday, and then Dearness Johnson started that Thursday and put up a pretty big game. I believe, if memory serves, he did 2 in a row. So he had 2 starts in a row that time. So the Dearness Johnson rule going this week to Dearness Johnson.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you originally said Gardner Minshew, and I love what you said about looking at, because now with concussions, it's going to trend, even if it's a full 7 days to the following Sunday, a lot more players missing, and maybe the general threshold is going to be they don't play the following week with the new attention and guidelines and attention paid to it before. And so Thursday, definitely not. And then it also brings in, like you said, just a tweak of an ankle, a shoulder, well, he gets an extra 10 days if we hold him out from this, and there's a lot of break ties in that direction just because no time. They basically, real reports start like Monday/Tuesday. And it's like you get instant feedback, and that would be a player highly relevant to the waiver wire. So you can A, save money there, and B, again, like you said, you can kind of steal some starts or steal some probabilities for starts, especially at running back. If you are breaking ties, especially in shallower formats between backup X and Y, one that has the Thursday coming up, you got to imagine you're increasing a few percentage points there for potential for a streaming start. Because again, we're just playing probabilities and rolling dice, by going with that. But when you bring in that the probabilities, if they were to sustain a concussion, a lot higher, then again, I mean, that's one that's not season ending by any stretch, but yet would give us some streaming starts.
Yeah, totally.
Love that. All right. So trading this week, I tried to make some applicable ones with running backs that are in the news. Breece Hall is a key one. Deonta Foreman coming out of his big week with no Christian McCaffrey. And Josh Jacobs is another key one. So we're going to break down some of those in these trades. The first one starting off with FFPC 1 quarterback. Josh Jacobs for a 23 first that should be playoff. But as we know, that is one of the trickier formats to predict draft position and to predict, unless you're sitting here at 6-1 or better, that, I'm a lock for the playoffs, because it's a very high variance format.
Yeah, it's a very high variance format. I guess I would say my hang up with Josh Jacobs right now, the only real hang up I have on Josh Jacobs right now is his contract insulation, right? If he gets hurt, right, you could be sitting in a situation where, all right, now he's kind of in a Marlon Mack type world. And that's
where he doesn't have a lot of appeal because NFL teams want to see him healthy, and that may not occur until much later. If he tears his ACL, you may not know that until for teams to feel super comfortable, till what, post NFL draft?
Yeah,
Which could be dicey.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're looking at running
Opportunities.
back, 30 in Dynasty, 25, 30 in Dynasty, where if he was signed right now to a, even if he did a James Conner contract, right? Even if he did that, you would all of a sudden be feeling like, all right, like
he's very high variance, right? I
feeling
mean,
pretty
for example, if he continues on this stretch, largely healthy,
he could finish as running back 1 overall.
Well, I was
The
talking about
running
more
back
from
one.
the Raiders' perspective. Like, I still think it was very sound of them, and it doesn't mean they don't like him at all. That they didn't give him the 5th-year option, because it's marginally more for them to just tag him. So Raiders have all the control here. Contract year, Jacobs is playing well, but like you said, the curveball is, what if the injury, especially if it taints how the free agency period will go for him, because he could be highly lauded and the Raiders are like, oh, we can't let him get out there. Or it's, he got dinged up, didn't really finish too well, missed some games, and teams aren't comfortable with him during the free agent period where he can lock up a job. Right. And here's the other thing. He's 24. He's 24, to say that, again, it's not overly old, but there's a lot of young guns up high in the running back position. I still say, I mean, so far, Jacobs has been one of the really quality values across, because he was deep in the 20s, right? I mean, in the summer months, you couldn't, I'm not going to say give him away, but he had a lot of stink on him. And all we kept saying was, he's been like a top 15 guy all 3 years. What do you want? Yeah, what do you want from him? And now he's having his best season.
Right.
So,
and he had the Fournette sort of the Fournette unrealized duality role, like the full on bell cow, like put a crown on it.
But, he hasn't finished as running back 3. Like it feels kind of like the spoiled, you crossed your arms. You're like, I want more. I want more candy. I got some candy. I got good candy, but I just want more of it.
He basically finished as like a top 15, top 12 running back as a
auto start guy for 3
guy.
years with round 1 pedigree.
Right.
No,
but 2 different ways, right? Had done it almost entirely as a runner initially, and then he had a huge receiving year last year and didn't do the running stuff as well. They weren't as good on the ground. And so he had that Fournette appeal, which was like, if he ever got it in one season, it's an enormous season. And now he's getting it. And honestly,
is it strange? I still think there's more upside, because the Raiders as an offense haven't truly been healthy all around, with Waller and Renfro and Adams producing. And, I just feel like they haven't really fired on all cylinders yet.
Right.
So this whole multiple touchdown thing, that could be regular. I mean, he gets used at the goal line, and if they start getting down there a lot. So this whole, like, as you said, running back 1 overall, it's well within reach. This is a reality. But like you said, the downside has to be measured as well, because I always say, when you make trades, especially when you trade a pick for a player, it's a contending trade. And you've got to, you have to assess this trade. If Jacobs gets hurt tomorrow, how do I feel? Would I still do the deal? Because that will pull you off of including firsts in plenty of deals, I think, if you ask that singular question.
Correct.
So anyway, going back to this, how do you feel?
If I was going to make the playoffs, I'd do it. If I was going to make the playoffs, I'd do it. And I, specific to this deal, a couple of things.
Does that mean you have to be 5-2 or better?
If I was 4-3 and I was in the top, in the top 4
strong point,
sort of all play, right? And I I could look at it and I could say, like, and again, my stuff's not fluky, right? I'm not dependent on,
let me ask you
Bailey Zappi at quarterback 2. You know what I mean? Like, you can kind of look at it and see.
Well, let me ask you, or would you be more or less likely to do this deal in a format where obviously backup running backs are easily accessible off the waiver wire, but you can't roster that many? So if you have a lot of waiver dollars left, technically you could buy a guy, I'm sure, at some point that benefits from injury. Or do you say, well, Jacobs is lock and load. He's a top 5 guy and might finish as running back 1. And you can't find that really probably off the waiver wire. So does that make you more or less likely to do a deal like this because of the nature of FFPC?
It's a little bit more replaceable, right?
Yeah.
So that I do think, but it's
even Jacobs. Even Jacobs, because
the exact same number as Jonathan Taylor was.
Because Dearness Johnson, technically, I mean, you say, oh, well, Hunt gets traded and then Chubb goes down, boom. I mean, you might have a top 5 guy. So I mean, But
Fair.
in like 30-man dynasty, Dearness Johnson's not available.
Correct. Dearness
So
Johnson's not
that's
available.
yeah.
FFPC is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think my angle would be like, I think elite guys make a huge difference.
Right.
And so, and again, you might quibble with the idea that Josh Jacobs is an elite, but think about that, put a comma, and then say, but he's scoring the exact same amount of points as Jonathan Taylor did last year. Period. Right.
Right.
That's
Well,
how you have to
and he's on a
function
stretch
that.
that's like right there with Austin Eckler, and I mean
Correct.
he's the guy moving the needle a
Absolutely.
pronounced way.
Right.
He's two players in your lineup.
He is tied with how many points Jonathan Taylor scored last year as the overall running back one. So you have to respect that in terms of in terms of the difference making, and it's running back 2 right now, right? Where Eckler's really at the running back, sort of the traditional running back 1 sort of level. I would,
and to be fair, and if you were a team where Jacobs would now slot in, maybe not scoring wise, but conceptually as like, I have 2 other really strong running backs.
Right.
You can start hammering people if all of a sudden Jacobs or one of those other guys is in your flex spot.
Correct. I think I make this deal, like if I can legitimately look at this team and say, like, all right, I'm going to be a bottom 4 pick, right? Like I am,
right.
this is a team that this is
a buy is within reach, especially with Jacobs.
Correct.
This is
a buy. This is a move you make if you're trying to move a contending team to a buy team. Right. That's the move you make,
because that buys you a playoff win. Going to a buy. That is. You're buying a win in a 50-50, 55-45 scenario.
100%. Right. And but it's worth also noting that there's a little bit depressed value in the 1 quarterback format, right? Because you don't have, that's not a quarterback there, right? If there's 3 top 10 quarterbacks next year, you're not sort of worried about that.
You don't benefit from that anywhere in the first round or in the format in general, right?
Correct.
So it does soften that pick slightly because we know in FFPC you can get in trouble drafting a lot of wide receivers, as rookies,
right?
Like just because we don't want to roster many of them, and frankly, roster spots are hyper valuable because you're saying no to running backs with finite spots. Correct. And all of a sudden, like for example, Rashad Bateman, you drafted him a year and a half ago, and it's like, well, what, you can still like him as a player, but you say, what have I really gotten in that shallow format?
Correct. And the other thing too is like, all right, if I could tell you, right, if this team moves, this is kind of like, do I take a late second, right? Brian Robinson, like would I trade a late second for Brian Robinson? Like what you're hoping to get is Brian Robinson in the late second. Like you're hoping that this happens. So you're already ahead.
Well, right? a healthy Brian Robinson on a depth chart that he's getting, 15 plus touches, and then the upside of, well, what if Gibson's out,
correct,
or whatever angles,
correct. And then so like the way I would also think about this deal is similarly like, okay, what's my goal, right? With a first round pick, I'm trying to move my team from being a contending team to being a buy team.
Try to get an auto start player, right?
And
auto start player, ideally a running back, since it's 1 quarterback, especially. And
yes.
Right. So it is checking a lot of those boxes. But the reason I included this is I did want to ask you, because there are some interesting bigger picture macro risks with Jacobs that, again, we're not, you're not expecting them today, but I think the angle of how does free agency work when you get hurt is an interesting wrinkle.
Correct.
All right. We got a massive one here. 1 quarterback, 12 team. Jamar Chase on the move. He's white hot. You got Jamar Chase and Tyler Algier. 4, Michael Carter, less value than 24 hours ago. No, 48 hours ago. And then George Pickens, and then 223 firsts. And both teams are below 500.
This feels like 3 firsts.
Yeah.
However, I don't feel great about it. Right? Like the flip. So I think the angle that I would take on this would be, I have a take on the Jets backfield. I think Michael Carter's the best running back there. So that's the initial take. So I think he's drawing plenty live to be a difference maker down the stretch. George Pickens should probably get you a first, would sort of be what I would think, right? I mean, you can go out and get a first with that, right? So you're basically getting 3 firsts. I don't think,
and one of those picks at 2 and 5, I mean, that could be in the running for top 2, top 3.
Correct. There's a really good chance that that's a that
premium.
That there's a number 1 overall pick in that. I think you have to take that side of it. just because there's so much there in terms of stuff being able to change your dynasty, especially if you're a team that.
Well, you're Carter, because I think a lot of people this week are on the James Robinson was signed to be the starter, and they pretty much just stopped the
Carter's a
sentence
better
there.
player, right? Like,
Okay.
is that controversial?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, if we're going by profiles, I mean, James Robinson has been there, done that, and done worlds more than Michael Carter ever has.
That's fair, but
And he's 24. It's not like he's 30. But
that's true too.
And here's one thing. Here's just one thing. I'm not on team James Robinson or team Carter for the record. But what I find interesting is they didn't even let the ink dry on the news of Breece Hall.
Like, I know.
James
that
Robinson
tells you something about Michael Carter, right?
Well, the fact that it was so swift to be like, well, we can't stay here.
Right.
Oh no,
right.
gotta go.
Right.
Honey,
does that say something about Hall? Does that say anything about Hall? Or are you not worried about that?
Does it say something about Hall? What do you mean?
About how
that
they don't think that he's going to be ready week 1 next year?
You think this is a move for week 1 next year?
I don't know.
The Jets are a team that right now I think are in the playoffs. So I think they're thinking about right now. I do think it's an interesting spin that Robinson is under contract for next year. This is not.
He'll be a restricted free agent.
Yeah, I mean, so like usually they keep those guys, so it's not a lot of team control there. So I do think it's an interesting wrinkle for the future because Robinson is a legit can carry the mail guy, and he's under contract beyond this year. Basically, he will be like most likely. So I think adding that. I don't know. To me, the fact that it was so quick, to me, pointed to Michael Carter. Well, we don't want him to be the whole thing.
Scary, right?
Yeah, like, oh, we're not comfortable with that. Right. And then I do think it makes it cloudy for the future if Carter, Robinson, and a healthy Breece Hall are there. That might split it more than Breece Hall folks would like.
Yeah. So it's funny because they acted so quickly to trade for James Robinson, and at the same time, James Robinson had just been benched by Jacksonville.
Right. And do you think maybe they got the call? Got the call in the owner box?
That's interesting. What time was that game?
I know. I know. Now I want to sync it up like it's a red zone or something.
I didn't even think it was Jacksonville a late game. That's a great question.
Who were they playing? This is
they're playing the Giants. No, I think it was an early game, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was an early game.
So the injury so the Jets game was late?
No, the Jets game would have been early too. No, that Jets game was in Denver. Well, I'll check here. This
that must have been
audio.
Almost always late. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Minutia. But I was a little surprised that I could have seen you go either way on this because I was going to ask if it was Justin Jefferson and not Chase, would you pick the other side? Because I know you have a little bit of a thing.
I think Chase is on that level now. So I think they're in a tier. I think they're in a tier. And the reason I think they're in a tier is we've seen a different Cincinnati, which was the big question that I had was if Cincinnati would actually throw the ball, and they've decided to do that. So I feel better about Chase now because I think he has more wiggle room. Even though I would probably, if I had to start an NFL team, I'd probably take Jefferson first. I think they're enough in a tier that
and those are the two guys that you would give up packages even remotely like this at wide receiver, right?
Three first, and this might even be more than that. Like, for any player in this format is almost, especially if they're going to be top half of the round. Like, it's really, really hard to take the player side of that. Like, it's just the payoff is just not typically enough. Like the payoff is typically.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I think I keep thinking about is those two picks. You can, I mean, we're talking if they're both in the top 6, and like if this ends up being like 2 and 5, that you are in a position to, I mean, the way people are talking up Bijan Robinson,
right?
It has a potential to be like you got to get to 1 kind of class. Like there might be such a tier, but you also might be in a position where I can get anyone but, and so it's a good spot to say, well, I have the ammo to trade up. If I'm a good team, I can parlay this. And there are outs where, I mean, that 2 and 5 pick could become Bijan Robinson. So I think, and he could easily be worth as much or more than Chase at points or soon, or, within spitting distance of startup drafts next year. So I think it's not a bad class. And there's other players as well. I don't mean to say it's Bijan only, but
Sean Tucker.
he has that look of making this work, making it right.
Right.
Even if you're like, wow, I'm giving up one of the 2 wide receivers that are like relatively bulletproof in terms of how they look. So I just, yeah. All right. So we've unpacked that one quite a bit. Next one in Superflex, we got Deonta Foreman for a 23-second. Pretty straightforward.
I think so. This is interesting because Chuba Hubbard was actually the starter in this game. So Foreman actually had more plays because Hubbard got hurt.
It was a pretty decent split before they went out, and then Foreman kind of ran with it. Yeah.
Right. I think this is probably the ceiling of what you see Foreman.
Oh yeah.
So
second is the most you get for sure. And I think that game too, he broke a 60-yard run, which A, not predictable. B, it was a point. Well, again, he scored well, didn't score a touchdown, and it was supposed to be a split. So things kind of go off the rails sometimes in game when you get an injury like that.
I think you take the pick. I think you take the pick.
Do you hold if it's a third? Do you hold Foreman?
Yes. Yep.
You just, even if it's keep away, even if you're 2 and 5.
Yeah, I mean,
what are you hoping to get from the third round?
Third to a second, right? I mean, just you might not get a straight second, but if it's a,
what if you can get second? Third and like a backup running back you like Madison?
Well, can you get?
See,
that?
I would
do that. Yeah.
Well, Madison. Well, you say that like it's obvious. Madison is valued probably like a third. I think Foreman traded for 2/3 is feasible. If someone doesn't want to give up a second, I think you can mash your way to basically getting a second.
That's fair.
Because Madison has outs in free agency and beyond this year that are, in my opinion, greater than Foreman. So
they're very. I think Foreman, they're real too. Right?
Yeah, and does Foreman make a difference? To use a Jordan phrase, does Foreman will he make a difference down the stretch?
If he falls in the woods, does anyone hear or care? Yeah.
Probably not, right? I mean,
right.
We're not talking high quality offense here. But
it is curious that they basically go away from Baker and all of a sudden their offense just runs over the Bucs.
I know. All I want to see, like, Carolina is interesting to me in this front. They should be heavily favoring this lineup, which is obviously DJ Moore, but Terrace Marshall played. I think he saw almost all the routes for the team, and then you have Laviska Shenault. Let him play the whole thing. Then you got Tommy Tremble. Play that guy and bench Ian Thomas or make him a blocker or whatever. But you've got to play those guys and say, who's going to be around next year?
Correct.
Who is a potential core player? Because all of them have perks to their profile and for some reason, have not produced yet. But you got to see. You got to kick the tires and give them a full workload and find out.
I could do 20 minutes on how Ian Thomas's contract is the worst thing in the AFC South, and that includes the Matt Ryan contract. Like, it's worse than that, which has like $20 million guaranteed next year. Yeah, it's a unbelievably bad.
Did you read some of the Matt Ryan stuff about how, like, when they quickly said that he's not playing the rest of the year just because of the injury guarantees, and it's like, oh, we don't want to pay. It's like $17 million if he doesn't pass his physical in guarantees early in the offseason.
Oh, wow.
So he has to recover. He's going to be in bubble wrap. Like, he is not. I do find it interesting, though. Just one sidebar. Why are they not playing Nick Foles? Are they really? A, do they think Sam Ehlinger gives them a better chance to win? B, are they considering themselves a non-contender at this point? I find those both quizzical.
Well, like, so this is an interesting debate, right? Like, because we think that teams should do this, right? Like, they've been the problem with teams playing, like, we have seen this in their case point, right? Like, having this retread sort of, end of career quarterback, or, go in the Carson Wentz angle or go in the Phillip Rivers angle. Like, it is a very capped situation, right? Who goes to Super Bowls? It's good teams with quarterbacks on rookie deals, or Brady,
and the Baltimore Ravens defense.
Right. Like, you look at and they're going about it the exact opposite. And really, like, people laud the.
Is your goal the second round of the playoffs, especially in the AFC, right? I mean, if you don't have one of getting through 3 rounds.
Correct. Right.
And you're going to face probably 2 of those, quote unquote, those guys.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And now, I mean, wouldn't you, like, if you go into the playoffs and you're like, oh, well, it's Matt Ryan versus Joe Burrow and
Yeah.
the Bengals. I mean, how does that work? So anyway, but what I do find interesting is, so they're going to see what they have at Sam Ehlinger,
Mhm.
but they acquired Nick Foles and Matt Ryan since they've had Sam Ehlinger. So shouldn't that tell you something about that they don't think a guy they drafted in the 6th round is on some fast track? So I don't know. It just feels weird that they're going to shut her down, or that the high odds are that. I mean, it seems like their move would be to play Nick Foles right now. But what do I
Well,
know?
if they wanted to contend, I mean, and like if they
Are they
wanted
really that far out of it? I mean,
so I just looked at the odds. They're still plus
please.
240 to win the division, which is
Yeah.
better than the Jags. And
Yeah.
I think the Colts are terrible. And
Right.
so
And
they're
plus
still better than
240
the
only.
Jags
They're only
with
plus
Sam
240.
Ehlinger. Right. So
All
it's
right.
still, I don't think the market thinks that they're totally in the tank.
I just
it
think this would be
has
hilarious,
moved, right?
though.
It has
I just think
moved.
this would be hilarious, though, if they get in a situation where later in the year they have to play Matt Ryan.
It's like Drew Bledsoe coming back.
Sure, like he
The
just
NFC
has to. Like they
championship
get down to maybe they sign
Right.
somebody, I guess.
Right.
Where's
There's a
Josh?
COVID outbreak.
Where's Josh Johnson? Seems like he signs everywhere that gets out of their 4th quarterback. Paging Josh Johnson. He just waits. He loves it in December.
Yeah.
He doesn't even wake up till Thanksgiving.
Maybe
Like,
the
all right, time
Jets
to get in shape.
the Jets could have used that pick and traded it for Matt Ryan instead of trading it for James Robinson and got an upgraded
There you go.
quarterback.
Oh, shots
Sorry,
fired.
Dad.
Fun watch. Zach Wilson's a fun watch every week. I mean that in many ways.
You think he's possibly going to generate a negative ADAT in a game because he's trending darn close to it?
Oh man, I thought you were going to make a Matt Ryan joke of like, just fumbled again. It's amazing how quickly the fall off is, and that's why I will never admit right now that Brady is on some like erosion track, because you know what, we've seen what erosion looks like. It looks like Ben Roethlisberger. It looks like Super Bowl winning Peyton Manning. It
Right.
looks like Phillip Rivers that last year. It looked like Matt Ryan for 6 or 7 games. That's what it looks like when you have lost it.
Right.
And that's how long. And Brett Favre that last year, remember? I mean, that's what it looks like, and that's when good quarterbacks leave. 98% of the time, that's when they leave.
Right.
It's when they've completely been ground up into taco meat.
Right.
They can't throw it. It's amazing. Matt Ryan it was short years ago that he was one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. And now he can't get out of the way of his own guard.
Yep.
It is. Anyway. So we exhausted Foreman. Let's do a Breece Hall one here. We've got Breece Hall for Travis Etienne and a 23 third.
So I have a question. And I asked you this question via text with a couple of other friends last night. How big is the list of people in front of Travis Etienne in Dynasty? Because it's shockingly small. And I just for the first time looked at the some of the data about this, and I was pretty surprised that I was sort of where the market came down. I'll be honest.
Okay.
What do you? How many people do you feel confident putting in front of Etienne right now?
Well, I have tier 2. I mean, just to name the guy. Well, so you had a shorter list than I did.
Well,
so
I said the conversation begins. Go ahead. You start.
So you said 3, right? Or did you say 2 or 3? 3, 2.
I think the conversation starts at 4.
4.
Right?
Okay. Where he is 4. He is number 4. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Or later. Right.
I will say this. I think with the profiles they have, that I think for me, there's a tier, but the tier that's above this tier is Taylor and Barkley. And then I think the next tier, and I've seen a lot of trades, especially the last couple of days, that all circle around. You've seen pluses on either side in deals revolving Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, and then these other names I will mention: DeAndre Swift, Christian McCaffrey, and then Josh Jacobs. And then some people are throwing in Kenneth Walker. So to me, that is the working list of that could be 1 tier, that could be 2 tiers for people, that could require as much as a second on a side. It could be as low as a 3rd or straight up, depending on team's direction, sensitivity to age, and some other factors. But I think that's the zone. So to me, the lowest you could have Etienne would be, what would that make it? 8, 9, 8 or 9 would probably be the lowest. And then the highest could be 3, depending on how you feel about obviously Breece Hall and the reset with his injury, Josh Jacobs and just maybe not believing the injury contract situation, McCaffrey with age, team change, DeAndre Swift injuries, Kenneth Walker, he's been around for 19 days or whatever. So
he looks awesome, by the way. He looks
here's he
the
is
second coming of like.
I'll just shout out my high leverage opportunity article because
Yeah.
he is blowing the doors off everything sensical in the Hilo world because they don't throw it to running backs.
Correct.
I think they're the only team to yet have a goal line carry for a running back. So he scores. That doesn't bother him at all. He's basically the two guys I say are Hilo beaters because they're so good. Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry.
Right.
And I refuse to have three musketeers and now say Kenneth Walker in that breath over the next 18 months of saying he overachieves annually his Hilo opportunities for the team. But you know what? He is right now. It makes no sense. But yeah, he looks fantastic.
Because he breaks a tackle like
he's
broken 3 tackles since we started talking about.
He's got burst, he's got speed, and he's like, inside the 5-yard line would be too easy for me to score.
Correct.
So I need to make it, level 6 difficulty. I need to go way out there. This is like the 9.8 platform dive for the Olympics. Like I need to make this a challenge on myself. I'll do it blindfolded. That's what I'll do.
What's interesting is I started thinking about this and I was like, okay, well, my initial thought about this conversation was Etienne versus Swift. And I was like, well, what's the argument for Swift over Etienne? And I was like, it's not draft pedigree. Like it's name brand.
Well, you're looking at it one way. Like I'm looking at it from how much have they actually done it in the NFL? And I know running back is a very much like you can do it on smaller data points. It's a much easier to quote unquote see it. And you can go off of pedigree. But here's what bothers me with Etienne. And it's funny because I was very pro Etienne coming out. But now sometimes when the price gets super high, you have to start being a little more critical and a little more scrubbing all the edges when you start looking at margins like this. So he's 2 years older than Breece Hall. Okay. And Breece Hall has had a higher ceiling so far. And I think we're projecting 2 to 3 games of Etienne. And here's the other thing. He's 23 and a half. You can say that doesn't matter, but if he already, is a lesser producer than say, how many big games has he had compared to Swift? Swift has big games. He has like easy 20-point games.
Right.
Like he just walks into them. Like I think the lone thing with Swift is health, right? Durability. Pretty much.
Yeah, and I think he's underperformed his opportunity so far. I think that's like he hasn't secured a starting job.
Yeah.
So I think the difference between the two is that Etienne vanquished James Robinson and DeAndre Swift can't put away Jamal Williams. Right? I think that's a very real, very, very real concern.
See, to me, both of them, like, here's the thing with Etienne. I watch him. He looks like the smallest 10-pound back I've ever seen. And when I see him inside, I pray that they use him like Alvin Kamara. He's not, and Kamara's good inside, but I just cringe because I'm like, I want to see you. I want that. Let's call it the 10-5 principle. I want 10 carries and at least 5 receptions. And when you start getting to like 14 carries and 4 receptions, I start throwing note cards. I start throwing headsets when I'm watching games. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Get Kamara into space. Get McCaffrey into space. You're wasting him. Any running back could run like in the A gap. Get Latavius Murray off the street to do that 10 times a game, So that's my problem with Etienne. I see him. He's awesome in space. He's awesome on the edge, and he's a big playmaker. But grinding him up the middle, honestly, he needs a James Robinson. Like he needs a Robin that's going to take a few touches. And I just hope. I don't think Jermichael Hasty's that guy. I hope Snoop Connor takes 5 or 6 power runs a game off his plate. But I just hope he doesn't get too beat up because he's a small 210. And so that's my one thing with Etienne is I hope he gets optimized. We've seen Swift optimized. We've seen him get used to space a lot. And I don't mind Jamal Williams taking away, taking some of that off his plate. So
that's fair. I think the thing that I would there's a value to this year, right? When you compare him against Hall, which is really, there was 2 players that that sort of popped in my mind about how do you value Etienne against Swift and how do you value Etienne against Hall? And like when you sort of look at the 2, I think you have to, it's tough to say like, all right, if we're going to get sort of a top 12 projection out of Etienne going forward, like that's a win from between now and the rest of the season. And like you have to be elite for Hall to make that up, right, over the next like 2 years. So that's a huge ask. And, we've seen some slow returns, and I'd be interested to see Dr. Jean's, I'll have to talk to Dr. Jean about this,
Well, yeah,
but we have seen
clean
some slow
ACL
ACL.
versus complicated knee. I mean, the J.K. Dobbins one is one that should give you pause of
David
let's not.
Bakhtiari.
But he did say,
too.
I did remember, Gene Bramble did say, and a common write-up for him is if it's a straightforward ACL only, then he can easily be ready for training camp and preseason and week 1. And, life is good. And if that happens, and that's why that's what makes this week or these next couple weeks, or as these teams jostle around within the running back position, so fascinating to me between, Hall, what he did, the track he was on, being 21. And then if it turns out like Dobbins next year, then how does that look? Are you waiting until 24? How much time are you burning? And then that 21-year-old, it turns into 23 before you get a lot of returns from it. And how much did you get from what you got Hall in return?
Right. And in the meantime, Etienne has rung up 2 wins on you, and you're chasing, right? That's a lot to chase.
Well, and all the angles of high leverage trades like this, because we always say too, if you make that trade, Hall for Etienne somewhere in that radius, if Etienne gets hurt in 2 weeks, do you still like the deal? So these are, again, the unknown of, well, I'm assuming I'm one of the halves now because I acquired that and I gave up, a player that was hurt and we push it out. But the player you get could be pushed out. So it really is. It really does make it complicated. And frankly, I call it the gray area because you can't predict injuries, and it can really shade these trades. And frankly, I mean, people wouldn't be trading away Breece Hall if he wasn't hurt, really. So they'd be riding him.
Right. For sure.
So what do you think in terms of if you were trading Breece Hall, just to kind of close this, Breece Hall in that perimeter of 6, 7, 8 running backs, and you were saying, I'm going to trade him to get something back now and healthy, and that helps me making a dynasty trade. And it was all within the structure of like, second, third added to either side type stuff. What would be your primary angles?
I mean, I think you could stay young, and I think you could go to Swift. Like, I think you could go to Etienne. I would probably do those straight up. I think another way to think about this is use it as a vehicle to make it a 2 for 2, right? Like, if you're sort of making this deal, you've kind of identified the other person as a team that's probably not contending, right? They're willing to take on, Breece Hall for a player that's not, for a player that is contending, or in the case of Swift is expected back. Use that as a leverage point to say, all right, let's go 2 for 2, right? Let's sort of make this a bigger deal and sort of use this as a vehicle to do that.
Where you add a pick, because they'll probably want picks, and then you get, let me get a wide receiver profile I like, or let me get an upgrade at tight end or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's sort of the more so than like whenever I see a 1-for-1, I was like, all right, well, a 1-for-1 trade is really a jumping off point for improving my roster construction, right? Especially when it's within position. Like, okay, now I've got this 1-for-1. We sort of got the big parts figured out. Let's figure out some small parts around it to make our lives better. And that would be the framework with which I would do it. And then that's kind of how I would make the move.
One final point from the chat here is you can always buy Breece Hall back later. His value will be lower than it was 2 days ago, which is true. That you do have a window here. Like, how about you find out a little bit about the knee surgery? Maybe you can do some sleuth work. Maybe it's from Gene Bramble, other sources where you say, oh, like it was a ACL plus something repair. Like, and that can maybe reduce the buyer remorse factor. Maybe it's not making a move this week. In terms of buying Breece Hall or selling Breece Hall, that you can. And again, I think one of your angles is, selling Breece Hall, there's probably less downside because he is pulling running back 3, 4, 5 dynasty value.
Correct. So he hasn't sunk, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of value in selling him, but in terms of have some pause in buying him if you are interested, just because it's probably going to be a similar price when you get to the off season, or maybe even in a few weeks, we have more information.
Yeah. By the way, our Dr. Gene, who does by far the best, he's often imitated, never duplicated. Just I'll read from his report. You can find it on the website. It's like I write a couple articles a week. I do the waivers. I do fixing your dynasty teams, right? You do things that I read every week, Chad. This is the best thing that Footballguys does. Probably this in the League Dominator. These two things are like as valuable as things as you can find. The Jets and multiple national reports confirmed Hall's torn ACL diagnosis. Hall also has a meniscus injury. He'll need surgery to reconstruct the ACL, 8 to 9 month recovery time.
So week one in question.
Week one in question. So
multiple ligaments.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's right. This isn't the quote unquote straight ACL, which gives me some pause, right?
The downside is J.K. Dobbins' outcome of he comes back, false start, corresponding cascading injury, setback type stuff. And the downside is next year is a decent amount, wash.
Correct.
That's the downside. Obviously, It could go much better. Week one, he might be fine.
Yes.
But again, what we're saying is it's not that he's trading for running back 10 value. So, especially if you're a contender. Again, this might work well if you're not contending.
Right.
Like, this is perfect.
Right.
But it still might affect your 2023. So just know that. So great information. Yeah, Gene Bramble, when especially the multiple updates. When I get literally it's sometimes Sunday night / early Monday morning, it's like he's ready to go.
Right.
And having that ready before waivers and you're setting them on Tuesday, let's say, and having some of that requisite information on who's coming back for this week, probabilities and all that stuff. Very, very applicable.
That's great.
All right, let's finish out with a few quotes from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum this week. Aging value is hard to get good return on investment later. Ezekiel Elliott is someone likely to be ridden into the sunset, as is Davante Adams.
I think they're a little bit different profiles. Like Davante Adams, I think age is better than Zeke probably does. But I mean, it's a question of what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're trading for Davante Adams right now, you're trying to win, right? Your goal is to win. Your goal isn't to try and, play the dynasty value game. Your goal isn't to enter dynasty bikini season, right? Which is when you just tweet out pictures of yourself on.
We should say that 2.5 months until dynasty bikini season. Until all these stupid lineups don't matter anymore.
Right. You got to get
playing dynasty for real.
Right. You got to get yourself in bikini season shape. That's not right. You take Davante Adams because you want to play deep into December, right? Like not because you want to look good
we should have Spider-Man. We should have Spider-Man versus Spider-Man pointing, and then one of them says dynasty lineups, and the other one says bikini season.
Yeah, so I don't care. Like if I'm making moves for those guys, if I have those guys, I'm trying to win. Like my goal is to win, right? And the teams
if you're a competitive team, and to be fair, if I was 2-5 right now with Davante Adams, I mean, yes, there are certain things I'd be looking for in the marketplace, and I'd be open to selling. But we'd say it all the time. Are you planning to not contend in 2023?
Right.
Because trading Davante Adams away could affect your chances next year as well.
Correct.
So you've got to be careful about the assumption of going deep into the dark cave of selling off the guys that are in your lineup every single week, no questions, and just not throwing those guys away, but you have to get the right kind of outs with the profiles you're getting and get, two-way goes and, high profile blue chip type stuff to make it worth your while. Because people always talk like, you have these historical examples where it's like, oh, I sold Calvin Johnson at 27 for max value, and whether or not he retired. But the premise was, or I sold Roddy White at 28, and then I cashed into the next 21-year-old phenom wide receiver. Well, what if that was Jonathan Baldwin and some, there's always there's always ways that it turns horrifically and you gave up a stud. And so the whole I just got a top rookie pick. Okay, well, who did you draft? Because that could have gone horribly right or horribly wrong. Right. So you have to be careful. And I would say Zeke is already at the point where if you have him at 27 at this juncture and say the market doesn't return a first, I would think that many leagues it won't. Then, I mean, are you selling him for a second? And then he gets to 28 and he's worth a second at most. Are you selling?
Right.
And then he gets to 29 and he's worth a third. Are you selling? If he still has lead jobs and stuff like that, so it goes down. And if you still like the player, it seems like it becomes easier and easier to keep him, is my general take.
Yes.
All right. Let's see. Last one. We've got the Pitts owner wants AJ Brown in my 14-team league. So it's kind of a advice sort of thing, but where do you stand on Kyle Pitts?
I don't feel great about it.
You mean them throwing 12 times a game doesn't really just jazz you up for Drake London?
To be feeling good in all the right places.
Well, at least they're not getting hurt, right? They're not running too many routes.
Correct. Great. Yep. Drake London, just keep him safe. I like even with the idea that they're not throwing it that much, he's still not generating that much on the limited opportunities they're throwing to him, right? He's playing like his route participation, which is how many dropbacks he's actually out there running routes on, isn't that high. Like he's not being targeted on that high percentage of routes. Like this should be a spot where you have a dominant tight end that dominates this type of spot, right? You're playing low volume, right? You're sort of scheming the hell out of it, and he's just crushing. You're targeting him on 30% of the routes, and he's just crushing it. Not the case. And I always go back to like when this happens, right? We think, right, as we sit here, everyone, like if you polled the Dynasty community, 100% of people would respond with the idea that Kyle Pitts is being underused, right? 100%. Everyone would agree with that. No one agrees with anything.
You should do a poll. You want to be liked on Twitter. Is Kyle Pitts being underused? Yes, no. You'll still get some no.
It's 100% yes.
Misused.
That should give you a little bit of like, well, why? Right? I think Arthur Smith is smart. He does smart things, right? They've done smart things. The organization has done smart things. Like, why are they not doing what we think is smart?
They're smart. Then why aren't they playing Desmond Ridder? Why aren't they pulling a Sam Ellinger?
I mean, they're trying to contend in a division that's not very good right now, right? I mean, like you got to play for your job in this too. Like I get sort of that's why I think the Indy thing's interesting when you juxtapose it against this because they actually can. Like I think Indy has a little bit of job security where they're willing to sort of do a thing like this. But listen, Philly did this with Doug Peterson, and Doug Peterson was like within like 2 years of winning a Super Bowl, and he does the tanking thing on Sunday night where they lose.
That's
and
right,
get a good pick. And by the way, that has reset their franchise. By the way, like the value from that pick is like still coming back in.
That was with Washington, right? Like it affected. Washington, I believe.
Right. Remember then the Giants were complaining that at 6-10 they didn't get into the playoffs. It was hilarious. The whole thing. But I mean, Atlanta, I think like they see themselves as a team that can compete for a playoff spot, right? And I think as a team that not for long, right? It's probably not the avenue which I would go to try and find a Super Bowl contending team. But who's the second best team in the NFC? Like, it's not Atlanta, but it's a pretty interesting list of teams that aren't very good outside of Philadelphia, right? So I understand why they're sort of playing it out, and maybe Ritter's not ready. But I think they're generally smart. I think they're generally a smart franchise, and that begs the question of if they're generally smart, why are they doing this with Kyle Pitts? Why are they limiting him? And I don't understand that, and it gives me some pause.
Can I say one thing? And obviously, year one, he produced plenty of yards. Everyone says, well, if he only produced touchdowns, I mean, look where he would be. So it's a little bit prism. But I do remember, in general, that we had this conversation with David Njoku. He was crazy young when he came into the NFL. And it's taken him a while to turn from flashes to this is really the first year where he's been pretty darn durable and rock solid as a starting and receiving centric tight end in the NFL. It's been a while. He's already been, was he tagged? I know he got a new contract, but I can't remember the interim between those two times.
They tagged him and then gave him the money.
Yeah. So I mean, it's been a while. And again, Pitts is on a higher trajectory through 1.5 years. But I just harken back to he's crazy young. And a lot of times, that year two growth, we've seen it at quarterback, right? The NFL corrects to you a little bit. Last year, they might not have, like, what are we going to do with this guy? He's 6'6", but they're playing him a wide receiver. He's kind of a tight end. What are we doing with our matchups and our packages? And we put a safety on him, a corner. Can't do a linebacker. I mean, I don't know. Crazy pills. Get the linebackers off the field. We can't have, but anyway, they had to figure those things out on the fly. And I think teams, especially in this division, probably come in this year and they have a lot more idea how are you going to handle Kyle Pitts. And frankly, it's probably easier because it's like, well, they're a team without Matt Ryan from last year who was throwing the ball a lot. And now it's like, well, less damage being incurred, less wrath because it's, 15 passes, 20 passes a game. So I don't know. Part of that is it for me. I still find it interesting that he's like a no-brainer top 2, top 3 tight end. I still find it interesting. The market is just all over him as like, oh yeah, like it's just a given. It's a given with Kyle Pitts.
Yeah. I mean, again, the difference between good and very good is small at tight end. The difference between very good and elite is enormous, as big as any position.
Well, I just think back to the decision with Pitts versus Andrews. How's your year going with Pitts versus Andrews?
Horribly.
With Pitts, you might be at the bottom of your league, but hey, I got a long-term building block. With Andrews, you might be
in first place.
You might be 5-2 instead of 6-1 instead of 2-5 or 1-6.
Yeah, and like the most rare accomplishment, and this is the thing that I wish that I had known sort of 6 months ago, and that I had wished that I'd sort of looked at and appreciated. But the value of the tight end that has gotten all the way to the mountaintop is enormous, and it's durable, and it's rare that their one hits. Right, it's almost always injury related.
For years, chunks of a decade.
Right, you're more likely to have hit 5 times than to flame out. Like you're as likely to have hit 5 times. Yeah. You're almost like it's a really good indicator of going to the Hall of Fame, right? Like you sort of look at all the running, like it's been 19 running backs in the last 21 years. Like 2 guys have done it twice. Like it's a lot of different people at receiver. It's a lot of guys at quarterback. It's only guys that have elite seasons, and it's guys that have, it's Kelsey, it's Gronkowski, it's Witten, it's Gates, list. Like it's Gonzalez, like it's people that remade the position.
Is Kittle on the list?
Kittle has not gotten there. Not gotten there.
He had one monster year, I know that.
It has been basically this decade it went Gronkowski, Graham, Kelsey, and now Andrews. Yeah. So again, like, and the difference between 1 and 2 and 3 is like the difference between 1 and 3 right now is like 9 points in PPR. Like that's an enormous difference. Yeah. Like TJ Hawkinson is wide receiver 3 right now.
Well, and you have that edge over everybody in the league, and that's the minimum. That's the minimum edge you have. Because I mean, imagine when you go into a play, like you get to the second round of the playoffs, you got Andrews, and you're going up a team that has Freiermuth, or Ertz, or Ingram, or Schultz. Like, I mean, wow. Like, talk about a matchup shifter. Like, it gives you such leeway at the other positions.
100%.
Like, I was going to ask you a question like, so let me see. What's more likely? Mark Andrews is elite and the year is 2025? Or, by that point in time, we have an elite season out of Kyle Pitts?
Much more likely that Andrews does it. Like and every prior would suggest that to you. And I regret
it's a different question with the age of Kelsey, right? It's because he's 32, 33.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a different question, but he's one that, again, you bet on him until not.
What I think a fascinating question would be, and if I really wanted to put myself in Twitter prison, I would
more top 3 seasons remaining, Kelsey or Pitts?
More top 1 finishes. More
top 1 finishes.
Yes. From now
Kelsey
until
or Pitts?
Kelsey and Pitts. And I bet you a big number takes Pitts. And I would take whatever plus I could get. Right?
It includes this season or not?
No, after this season. Right?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That would be a saucy bet.
Because 0 pushes.
Pitts owners would give you, they would give you odds. They would give you plus.
Oh, yes.
They'd probably give you plus 300.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm going to pull this, and we're going to report back next week.
Report
back. Yes.
Yeah. Just the most fire poll you can with the have and have nots of the tight end position.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
All right. There you go. All right. Sorry.
And I'll do one to include. I'll do
really
one
long,
this
but
year, and I'll
start talking Kyle Pitts at the hour marker. That's what happens.
Yes. This is. Yep.
All right. Sure. But worthwhile. But going back to that, you trade him for AJ Brown. Never addressed. Heard
Is
but never addressed.
the format would be like, is it straight
It's
premium?
just
I think you said 14 team.
14 team, one tight end. Yeah, like
I'd probably take Brown.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
me too. Well, it's probably 14 teams start multiple, if not three wide receivers.
Yeah, that has value to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's
Yeah.
on a max contract.
And he's like
One of the best offenses in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's
Yeah.
done it for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pitts, we're still waiting.
I did a
If he
deep dive
doesn't-
on Philly, which we can't go into right now, but
Yeah.
I'll just say that they went, every prediction that we had of them going back to this pass
Was
happy
wrong?
team was right.
Dead
right. Dead right. Everyone predicted they would sort of be this middling team. And I was like, it's either they showed us what they wanted to be at the beginning of last year. They showed us what they wanted to be at the end of last year. There was no middle ground. They've gone back to being the team that has thrown the ball a ton. I just don't think we've seen it because they've been up all the time. Right. So when they get to playing some better, they're 6-0 or 7, whatever they are. I don't think that they just had their bye, I guess. So 6-0. Right. Once we see some games where they're actually playing, not ahead, right? We'll get some.
Right.
We will see the benefit of them throwing it a ton more. We just don't see it right now because they're playing with good game script.
In this episode, we discussed Kyle Pitts there at the end, a lot about Breece Hall, Travis Etienne navigating the running back landscape at this point in time, Josh Jacobs as well. And then, of course, at the beginning of the show, starting things out with stuck in the middle. Where do you stand? Some of the key questions, key moves, and the timing of those moves in this middle regular season mode. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.